Hi there, my name is Jared Bishop, and welcome to Design Thinking for SnapEd Part 2, Identifying Assumptions. Now that we spent some time thinking about why design thinking might offer some useful tools and mindsets for your SnapEd work, this next video will help you think through what assumptions might be underlying your approach to your design challenge. We'll also explore why examining assumptions is useful and what tools you can use to do this individually and with your design team. As we move into testing, identifying assumptions will help us set up our testing plan to make sure the intervention or solution we want to test actually addresses the need or design challenge we have identified. So, what are assumptions as they relate to the principles of design thinking? Any program, project, or intervention begins with ideas that are based on assumptions. Assumptions, therefore, are those things we think we know that we use to develop our intervention or solution. For example, a program designed to offer food skills education within a supermarket setting is likely making the assumption that members of their primary audience are 1. Receptive to receiving food skills education, and 2. Open to receiving that food skills education in a supermarket setting. Knowing that these are two of the assumptions our design team is making in this hypothetical example, then lets us know what direction we might want to go in for our prototyping, identifying upfront the underlying assumptions you're making as they relate to your design challenge or problem statement, and intervention, programming, and idea will allow you to focus your testing and your prototyping on those aspects of the overall challenge that are most important to ensuring success. So you can begin to understand the key assumptions you're making relative to your design need or design challenge by asking yourself and your team why you are considering a specific potential intervention and what specifically about that intervention idea you think will address the underlying need in a unique context. These assumptions should ultimately center around the feasibility of the design in terms of time, resources, and technology, and should include the constraints and opportunities presented by the setting where you plan to implement your design, the viability of the design over time, and the desirability of the proposed design. Desirability includes how well it incorporates key insights from your users about their needs and desires. So now we might ask ourselves, why is identifying and testing assumptions important? Well, identifying and testing assumptions is important for many reasons. First, testing your assumptions can lead to the development of an intervention that is better aligned with your end goal and the needs of the community for which you are designing. Second, testing assumptions early in the development of an intervention can also save you time and resources. If you realize earlier on that your assumptions are incorrect or that you're missing a key piece of context, you can adapt and refine your plan before launching a larger scale pilot or rollout. Third, you can clarify the roles and expectations between implementation partners to ensure the design works for your organization's capacity and your implementation partners. And lastly, testing assumptions allows us to actively acknowledge stereotypes, implicit biases, and assumptions you may be making about your primary audience. Without taking the time to unpack the assumptions underlying your design, your final product could fail to promote sustainability or effective change in knowledge, behaviors, habits, etc., or at worst, could cause you to harm those for whom you are designing your primary audience. So now we'll take a look at a case study from some of the work that we have previously done. During the development of our food retail guide, our team brainstormed and identified assumptions throughout our co-creation sessions with key stakeholders. These brainstorms served slightly different purposes throughout the process and generated assumptions that helped us move through the co-creation process. During our initial brainstorm, we identified assumptions about how the meal box and rewards program would work in order to name the potential barriers up front, so we could creatively brainstorm what might be desirable or exciting. For example, naming assumptions about funding so we wouldn't be constrained by cost at first. After we developed the initial prototype of the food retail interventions, we identified assumptions we were making about the desirability, feasibility, and viability of the prototypes. These helped us refine the final recommendations and identify assumptions that may need to be tested in real-world settings. After developing the prototype to test, we continued to meet with key stakeholders to identify assumptions about how these interventions would work in the grocery store environment. Without identifying assumptions, we might have directed our prototyping efforts to elements of the intervention design that were less critical to its success with our primary audience, wasting time and resources in the process and potentially leading to a less impactful program in the end. So there are many ways and moments to identify and reflect on assumptions. The methods and activities you use should fit with what works best for your team and the people you may be engaging with to help you identify or challenge assumptions. The IDEO Design Kit, as a resource, can help you identify the right mix of activities to move you and your team further along. So now it's your turn. Grab your pen and paper and take part in this opportunity for reflection and action. For this activity, please list the assumptions you may be making or have made about the project or intervention you are currently planning and designing. You may want to consider questions like these. What assumptions have I made about our community's needs? Have I made assumptions about their barriers or about desires? What assumptions have I made about our team's capacity and/or resources? What assumptions have I made about our implementation partners' resources and needs? So now we encourage you to pause the video and take 5 minutes to list out the assumptions. Welcome back. We hope that activity went well for everyone. Take this list to your next meeting and talk through it with your team to prioritize assumptions that you want to learn about through the prototyping process. Remember that identifying assumptions is an ongoing process throughout your intervention development and implementation, and is worth revisiting as your project continues to advance. In our next video, we'll dive deeper into this prototyping process to allow you to begin planning to test your intervention ideas. Keeping your answers to these questions handy will also help as you begin to think through what prototyping your idea might look like in a specific setting. So again, thank you for taking the time to brainstorm assumptions with us. The next video will walk you through developing a prototyping plan to test these assumptions. If you have any questions, please email us at designthinkingforsnaped@unc.edu.